You're just starting your job search or looking to make a career change, today's session is designed to provide you with valuable insights and practical tools to enhance your interviewing process. We are currently recording this webinar to ensure accessibility for all participants. You can also enable closed captioning via your browser. We recommend using Google Chrome, where you can click on the three dots in the upper right-hand corner. You're going to click on Settings and then Accessibility. You may refer to the screenshot in the presentation. Reference a breakdown of instructions on how to access closed captioning on different browsers in the content section to your right, or reach out to one of our esteemed Career Circle employees in the tech support booth in the lobby to assist you. All of the resources that we've discussed today and more can be located on the Content tab near the People and Discussion feed to the right. All resources and the recording will be emailed to you after the event. I repeat, because this is a question that comes up a lot. All of the resources and the recording will be emailed to you after the event. So please make sure to watch until the end, as our amazing panelist has a wealth of knowledge to share. Before we get started with introduction, here's a QR code for our survey. You can open it up on your phone and share your feedback with us. If you miss it, no worries. We'll send the survey in our post-event email too. But if you want to give us your thoughts during the event, while it's fresh on your mind, we'd love to hear from you. Now, with that being said, I've been talking and you don't even know who I am. My name is Brittany Knowles, and I have the amazing pleasure of being the Learning and Development Specialist here at Career Circle. I am going to give you my description. And so today I am wearing a natural hairstyle. I'm wearing black cat-eyed brimmed glasses. I'm wearing some hoop earrings and a black t-shirt with jacket. Now I'd like to pass it over to the one, the only, our amazing panelist on today, none other than Ethan. Can you give us your descriptive intro?
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on. Hi, everybody. My name is Ethan Parker. I am the recruitment manager here at Career Circle. I am showing up today with short brown hair. I have glasses on with silver frames, and then I am wearing a black quarter zip with a blue and teal Career Circle logo on it. Very excited to be here today. Okay, so yeah, hopping right into content here. We'll go ahead and start to talk about interview preparation and kind of etiquette before you start to go into your interview. You'll want to take the time to go ahead and research the organization in depth. So before you go into the interview, it's important to really understand the company at a wider scope than just how you would fit into that organization. You want to understand how the organization positions themselves in the marketplace. So take some time to familiarize yourself with their website, their presence on social media, Google, things like that. Things that would stand out to you when you're taking this information in would be kind of their values, their culture, and kind of news that surrounds the organization. It's really important to, again, get a greater understanding of the organization so that you can visualize how you would work within this organization, but more to the point, so that you can ask employers additional questions about how they've worked within that organization, how they like working there, things along those lines. You'll want to also take the time to really understand the role in depth. So you'll want to know the job description and the required skills. This part's kind of self-explanatory. Reviewing the job description can be really helpful, of course, with this, but try to take the time to get an understanding of how people who are in that role active or articulate those skills within social media. So usually what I would recommend to members in this case would be to go ahead and check out LinkedIn, not just for this organization, but for other organizations, and see how people with this title present their skills and see if there's any deviancy from the job description that you've already reviewed. Practicing common questions. You want to prepare answers for those frequently asked questions. It's really important to take the time to gain confidence within the interview context. And the best way to do that, honestly, like practice makes perfect, right? So it's really important to understand not just how you will verbalize answers and feel confident in that delivery, but also make the conversation engaging for the opposing party in the interview. And kind of like helps you to tee up conversational aspects to make it more engaging, as opposed to basically one person's asking you a question and you're answering the question. Doesn't feel great for the interviewer or the interviewee in a lot of cases. Preparing those questions ahead of time is an easy follow up to that. So making sure that you have questions about both the organization, the interviewer themselves, the operations of the role on a daily basis. Having those insightful questions can take an interview from being this really structured and rigid kind of formalized process where people are kind of going through the motions to an engaging interview with a different party. And ultimately, as humans, this is just kind of like basic, how we work more or less. We have a tendency to remember conversations that are engaging as opposed to things where we're just kind of doing our job, right? So anything that you can do to make that conversation engaging for the secondary party there is really, really helpful to help you stand out as both an interviewer and as a worker in the long term grand scheme of things. Reviewing your resume and coming prepared to kind of talk through your work experience and some of the achievements that you've had up to this point is also really important, of course. You want to make sure that you review your resume and that you feel good about articulating more or less every bullet point that's listed on there from an experience perspective. And if there are skills that you've listed in your skills summary that are not reflected within your resume, you'll want to come prepared to talk through how you have leveraged those skills up to this point. So let's say you recently completed a certification in data analytics and you gained some exposure to Tableau, but you never really used it in a professional capacity. You'll have that bullet point listed that you have the Tableau proficiency, but it won't be reflected anywhere else. So you'll want to take the time to really articulate why that's important, or not why that's important, but how you have used it like within your greater portfolio, any projects that you've done up to this point, and really take the time to walk the interviewer through that process and how you kind of gain those skills. As far as mock interviews go, this is, again, practice makes perfect in a lot of ways, right? So putting yourself in that position is probably the best way to feel prepared going into an interview. I highly, highly recommend getting some time with people that you feel comfortable with at first. So think friends, family, things like that. It helps with that confidence aspect. And you get nervous role playing things regardless, but just having somebody that you know well on the other end of that helps to kind of negate that a little bit. And so as you gain confidence with interviewing, then you can take that to both mentors or even the career coaches that we have here at Career Circle. It's absolutely a service that we are happy to kind of do with members. We'll take some time to go through a mock interview, kind of give you some interview preparation resources, and really make you feel prepared to win the interview at the end of the day. Lastly, take the time to really understand the interview format. Most of the time, whenever interviews do get scheduled, it will come with some information about the interview itself. So whether it's a panel, who will be participating, if it's a virtual interview, a lot of that time it comes through with the actual confirmation of the interview. In the event that it doesn't, don't feel hesitant to reach back out to the coordinator and ask for that clarifying information. It's really important to have an understanding of what you're getting into to make it more comfortable for you and make you more confident while you are in that interview setting. And then moving on to our next slide here, I want to talk a little bit more about what to do during your interview. So this is kind of bread and butter, basically the meat and potatoes of the actual interview process, regardless of the interview format, whether it is a phone interview, whether it is a virtual interview, or it's on site. You'll want to aim to be there 10 to 15 minutes early. In the context of a virtual interview, this can take the shape of just logging on a little bit early and really making sure that you have all of your technology in order, right? So if it's Teams, Zoom, anything else like that, you'll want to take the time to log on, make sure that your camera's working, make sure your microphone's working, run a quick equipment check, all that good stuff, and kind of clear the area of distractions before you get into the interview itself. And if it is a phone interview, very similar. Take the time to clear your area of distractions, make sure you have your notes handy, and kind of get yourself in the zone, so to speak, for the interview. Dressing appropriately is obviously a huge one, even if it is a remote interview, right? So even if you're hopping on Teams or a phone call, anything like that, you'll want to actually, again, kind of put yourself in the zone, so to speak. So if it is a phone call, that might not take the shape of going into like a full like dress shirt, everything like that. You might just put on like a polo, make sure that you're fully dressed and all that good stuff, but make sure that you feel like prepared and confident in yourself while you are talking. Attire can really help with this in a lot of ways, and we get a lot of positive feedback from members who take the time to really make sure that they're well prepared from an attire perspective. Obviously, if you are going on site for an interview, make sure that you dress appropriately for it. Dress apparel, usually business casual, is kind of the context. In the event that you are unsure of the dress code for the interview, you can always ask the person who is coordinating if they have any advice on how to best prepare. Most of the time, again, they'll probably advise you on business casual. Um, as far as listening carefully, you'll want to make sure that you take the time to pay attention and really think about the answers that you're giving back to the interviewer. In the event that you don't understand a question or that you are kind of unclear on a piece of verbiage that a question or how a question landed with you, you'll want to take the time to ask the interviewer for clarification on that. It's very, very important that you and the interviewer are meeting each other on the same level, so to speak. And so to do that, communication goes both ways, right? Again, as we talked about previously, engagement is very, very important in these interviews to kind of help you to stand out as a person who's very interested in an organization and very interested in a position. The more you can stand out mentally, the more likely it is that your interview will convert to a new position successfully. So anything, again, that you can do to both ask and prompt them to ask questions in the moment is very, very helpful from that lens. Showing enthusiasm, of course, very important in virtual interviews, especially over the phone. It can be difficult to do this. One piece of feedback that I've shared with members previously, and that seems to be very helpful for them, is like talking through your answers, but making sure that you're smiling while you're doing it in a mirror, right? Especially from a phone context, can kind of help you to get in that positive, like, lilt of voice where you are engaging with a person, coming across as enthused with your delivery. From a showing enthusiasm perspective in either a virtual or an on-person or on-site interview, it's very important to make eye contact, try to look at your camera. If it's a virtual environment, you'll see it kind of makes a difference. It makes you feel like you're talking, or makes the person feel like you're talking to them rather than like looking at them. But conversely, in the event that you need just a quick gut check to yourself, check how you're presenting yourself on the screen. Make sure that you're kind of coming across in the way that you mean to. Again, this is where those role plays, those mock interviews can go a long way and kind of pay dividends, because you'll get that feedback from people that you're speaking with of like, hey, it seems like you're kind of a little flat here, or you're not really interested. Maybe come across a little more bubbly, a little bit more enthusiastic about the position. And lastly, make sure that you ask your questions. We talked a little bit previously about preparing those questions. It's really important to, again, make sure that the interviewer understands that you are, it's more of a conversation than an interview, right? At the end of the day, you're there to assess whether or not you're a fit for an organization just as much as the interviewer is. There are sliding scales to this, of course, but you want to make sure that you ask the questions about how is it to work here, based off of your experience. Would you recommend this as a place to work? You want to ask a little bit more about their personal experience within an organization, and really take the time to gain a greater understanding of not just the role, but the organization and scope and what it means to be an employee of XYZ company. Moving on to our next piece of content here. You'll want to make sure that you are honest with your answers. So answer those questions truthfully and authentically. It's not unheard of course, for people to kind of stretch their accomplishments within an interview context. We do recommend that you take the time to make sure that you are answering those questions as truthfully as possible. Again, at the end of the day, it's a conversation to assess whether or not you're a fit for an organization, both ways. So in the event that you are stretching the truth to kind of make yourself more appealing or make yourself more of a fit for a position, it can kind of backfire on you in the event that you get that position and then you're not prepared to complete the work. And then eventually, your position kind of ceases to be because you're not able to do the core responsibilities for the role. So make sure that you're taking the time to accurately assess whether or not you are presenting your skills in a truthful manner. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a slide in a few minutes here, but the STAR method and behavioral interview questions are a core portion of interviewing generally. And we'll kind of talk through the STAR method in a bit more detail, but the long story short is it stands for situation, task, action, result, and it's kind of a methodology to answer open-ended questions. Moving to being concise, you want to make sure that you keep your answers very concentrated, like succinct, right? So don't need to give a lot in the way of additional context for personal stories, things like that. It's very much about like, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's what I'm interested in, and this is why I think I'm a fit for you, right? So that loose structure kind of gives you a lot to play with, but you'll want to make sure that you kind of try to do your best to kind of tie your answers up with a nice little bow and be succinct and concise while you are articulating your experience. Um, we'll talk about this again a little bit more in a future slide, but the elevator pitch, actually right here, is you want to keep that, again, very brief, succinct. 1 to 2 minutes is very helpful. For that framework piece, you'll see here we've kind of got it laid out in a couple different ways. Your intro, kind of the past and present of your current work situation, and then your future, right? So your intro, that's kind of, again, where you're talking through who you are and what you're interested in, right? So that who is this for piece, that's going to be who you're speaking to at the end of the day. It's very helpful to make sure that you are delivering the elevator pitch in a way that is meaningful to the other party. So again, you want to be very cognizant of the context while you are speaking to your interviewer, and be aware that you are there to secure a job ultimately. So when you're talking to someone in hopes of securing a job, make sure that you are positioning your skills honestly and truthfully. And again, make sure that you are trying to share your experience in a way that is relevant for the role. As we talk about that experience that's relevant, you want to talk through your work experience, your volunteer work. If you have hobbies or interests that are relevant for the position, let's say that it is an IT support role and you happen to have a hobby of building computers, that's the kind of thing that you'll want to mention as well. Especially like general passions around technology, that kind of stuff. Can be helpful in an elevator pitch, but you want to avoid being too general with it. If you can tie it to specific examples, it's very, very helpful. Strengths and skills and accomplishments, those kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. In the event that you are an awarded professional in some ways, or you have gotten some kind of specific achievement, this is kind of a good space to make note of that. And then lastly here, education and certificates can be a part of an elevator pitch. However, I don't always recommend it unless it is very specifically tailored to a piece of information that was on the job description. Oftentimes, by the time you've gotten into that elevator pitch, they will have reviewed your education and certificate, so they'll have a greater understanding of your background. However, if there is, let's say they're looking for education from a specific university, you can kind of talk through your curriculum in a bit more depth and talk about what it took for you to basically achieve that. Lastly, your future. You'll want to make sure that you are aligning your elevator pitch with your goals in the long term, right? So again, tying this to the interview context, as you're delivering this, you'll want to state your interest in the position pretty clearly, both whether it's specifically in the position or in the role. A lot of the times this can be a little bit more conversational, and you can kind of talk through this piece in more depth with your interviewer. Like, I'm very interested in this organization because I saw that they involve themselves in XYZ social projects, and I'm very, very passionate about impacting my community. That's usually the kind of route that you'll want to take with an elevator pitch itself. And I'm seeing some of this coming in later.
Yes, I was just about to say there's some people that are having possibly some auditory issues, maybe. And so we just want to make sure that we are not missing anything. So if you could just slow it down just a tad bit, we might have had some individuals that weren't able to hear everything.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to make sure that I either repeat or slow down. I'm going bullet to bullet here. Please continue to deliver feedback as you notice it. Um, Talking through mistakes when giving your elevator pitch. Too long or too short can be a bit of a problem. The biggest piece, and I would be more concerned with being too long than too short in most cases. We do have an ideal time frame of like 1 to 3 minutes, and you kind of want to think of it in structure of like a couple paragraphs, right? If you were like writing it down. But you want to avoid being overly wordy, kind of giving them information that may not be relevant for the conversation, things that are like very personal, kind of like your background with either family members or organizations that maybe would not be relevant to your job search. Try to take the time to make sure that you are aligning that elevator speech or pitch to your job search itself and the reason that you're there. Too short can be just as bad. Like, let's say your elevator pitch is less than a minute long. It can kind of give the implication that you don't really have a lot in the way to share about your professional experience or the educational information that you have been pursuing up to this point. So take the time to. It helps a lot in a lot of ways to write it down, and this also helps from like a memorization perspective. It helps to write it down and then kind of say it out loud a couple times. Some people time themselves. I have found that it's hit or miss with members whether or not that's of a lot of relevance or impacts to them. But it can be a very helpful resource to time yourself while you're going through your elevator pitch. Not knowing your audience, again, this is where that research from the prior slide really comes into play. Take the time to really understand who you're talking to as best as you can, right? So look them up on LinkedIn, get a greater understanding of the interviewers who will be on the panel, and sometimes avoiding like overly personal like addressing people with like either not their correct title or things like that can sometimes rub people the wrong way in an interview context. So make sure that you take the time to do that research on the front end, and try to know your audience with a bit more depth than just like a surface level. Memorizing the speech can both be a positive and a negative thing. If you memorize it to an extent where it just kind of sounds like you're reading from a script as you're delivering it, that's not going to land really well in an interview context. It won't be memorable to the other party, and it can be oftentimes more detrimental than like having it you not having said it at all. It's kind of like a net negative, right? But conversely, not memorizing it and kind of fumbling through it is also not really going to be helpful. So what I recommend in a lot of ways for your interview pitch is to take the time to kind of give yourself that loose structure, kind of what I mentioned previously. That's who am I? What do I want to do? Or what do I do? What do I want to do? And then who am I talking with, right? That loose structure will really help to kind of give you the lateral freedom to kind of bounce between each piece or each tent pole of that structure. And I will say, in the event that you put too much pressure on the memorization aspect of the elevator pitch, it can kind of get the interview off on the wrong foot, right? So let's say you have pressured yourself to memorize this and deliver it really well every time, and then you get to the interview setting and you kind of freeze up and don't deliver it that well. Well, now there's kind of like a knock-on psychological effect of that, and it kind of impacts your confidence for the remainder of the interview. So again, do try to memorize it. Just don't try to memorize it to the extent that it impacts your confidence in delivery, or you come across as robotic in the delivery of it. Lastly, here, you want to avoid being overly vague. Try to give quantifiables where you can, right? Like myself as an example, if I were delivering my experience in recruiting, I would say you could go about it two ways, but if I was delivering it vague, I would say I have several years in recruiting space for technological professionals. Rather than saying that, the best way to say it would be I am going on 8 years of recruiting in the technology space. That in and of itself, that quantification of experience just helps to help you stand out in the interviewer's mind as they are reviewing applicants, and then additionally helps them to get a greater understanding of your level of tenure within a role. That can be very, very helpful. Now moving on to our next slide here. We're going to talk in a little bit more depth about the STAR method. As previously mentioned, this is an acronym that stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. This is a method that's generally used for open-ended questions that are kind of used to determine how you would behave in a common workplace scenario. So you may have heard interview preparation questions along the lines of like, tell me about a time that you had a deadline to meet. Those kinds of questions, tell me about a time where, things like that, are these behavioral questions that they're trying to get a sense for. And so when you're thinking through the way that you want to answer this, you'll start with the situation. So you want to set the scene, kind of really give details of the example itself, kind of talk through basically the context of the situation. The task will be your next step. You want to describe what the responsibility was, so what your role was in resolving the situation. The action is describing exactly what steps you took to address the situation. And then the result is basically the bottom line, the impacts to the organization. So as an example, a STAR response to a question like, tell me about a time where you had a deadline. In my case, right, let's say we had a requisition that came in from one of our clients, one of our partners in the employer space. Essentially, they had a very tight turn time, and it was impacting a lot of projects for them to not have this person in this role. And so my job essentially was to go out and find a qualified engineering professional to essentially essentially kind of fill this gap as quickly as possible. So it couldn't be somebody who was actively employed. They didn't really have the time for a 2 week notice. And we had to take the time to really distill the qualities of somebody who could basically come in day one and be an asset, right? So my action there, I had to make a very concentrated and focused sourcing strategy to ensure that I found a professional that one would be able to join the team as soon as possible, and then two would have all of the core qualifications needed. They had very specific software design packages where they were essentially doing like electrical cabinet design. So had to make sure that they had that in hand, and then three would do like additional assessments and qualifications of their proficiency with that software package, so that the employer at the end of the day would feel very confident in getting this professional to work. As an end result, we were able to get a person who basically got them through the interview process, got them through that assessment process. And as a result of that, both my organization was able to make a strong relationship with this company. And additionally, that company was able to meet multiple deadlines independently of their own, because they now had a qualified professional in that space. So really, really just making sure that you walk them through end to end, like the problem intake versus the problem resolution is how you'll want to approach a star based answer.
Alrighty. So I wanted to take a pause for the cause. We have a couple of amazing questions that have come into the QA. If you have not already done so, please make sure that you are putting your questions for Ethan there, and we'll try our best to get to them today. And so, what I want to look at is, how would you respond to an interview question using the STAR method? If you were asked, tell me about a time you had a conflict at work, how would you respond
Mm.
using the STAR method, Ethan?
It's a great question. So you can approach it a couple different ways. I think it's important to recognize the intent of the interviewer when you're considering this question as well. They want to get a sense for how you will resolve conflict amongst your peers independently without like leadership intervention. So myself, again, I'll just kind of think through a scenario. I basically, as a leader within Career Circle, there are several times where my peers and I may not agree on a given course of action. And so as a result of that, sometimes emotions can get involved and people have like spirited conflicts that arise as a result. Essentially, as a leader, we want to make sure that we're keeping the roles or the operations within Career Circle very even keel. So we'll want to take the time to really understand each party's point of view, right, and kind of like de-escalate from there. Basically giving them the idea that you are actively interested in diffusing the conflict as opposed to escalating the conflict goes a long way in this question. I know I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between like the point of view of yourself and the point of view of the interviewer. But you want to go like imply, really heavily imply that you're more invested in like resolving conflict than escalating it. So in this circumstance, I would say something along the lines of, my job essentially at this stage is to kind of like bring things back down to level headedness, get tempers cooled down a little bit. And so what I did from there was I asked a lot of questions about why each person felt the way they did. I kind of really did a lot of seeking to understand the why a person was feeling a certain way, and kind of asked them questions about, based off of the new project that was delivered, why do you feel that may not be a viable option, or why do you feel that we may not be able to support this adequately? And in doing so and asking those questions, I actually uncovered a lot of really important information about how the other departments were structuring their body of work, and it gave me a greater insight into their deliverables. And so as a result of that, I was actually able to go with that partner and say like, hey, essentially, and talk to our senior leadership and say, hey, based on this body of work, we have several other projects that are on a very tight timeline, and thus it will impact our ability to deliver on this body of work. So I think what we need to do is basically run like an internal reprioritization exercise. And if this project is not as important as others, we'll have to relegate it to the end of the timeline. And by coming into it with that third party perspective, with that level headedness, it was able to basically resolve the conflict and make everybody understand each other's point of view a little bit more effectively, and basically create a more harmonious work environment for all of us.
I love the way you answered that question. It was as if I was there with you. I love it. Okay, very descriptive. The next question that we're getting is, what do these tips apply to More and more in tech, you show up to an interview virtually, and the interviews are not usually dressed professionally. They're in sweats, caps, t-shirts, etc.
Yeah, it's a great flag and a great question. The Oftentimes you are right. There is an element of work culture, workplace culture, as an example, where they are more accommodating of more casual attire in, more casual work environment. Um, what I would say in those cases is what's more important in a lot of cases is ensuring that you are putting your best foot forward, right? From an interviewer's perspective, it's helpful for them to see that you are dressed with that professional attire because it shows that you're invested in the opportunity, even without the scope of like how they would be dressed within that. Because at the end of the day, you can't necessarily control what they're doing or wearing in that moment, but you can control what you are doing. And so with you having that control and you making that choice to really represent yourself as maybe an elevated version of yourself with the professional attire, things like that, it can go a long way towards making a really positive first impression with your interviewer. And at the end of the day, you only get a handful of opportunities to make a positive first impression. So it's very important that you try to do your best to ensure that that impression is as good as possible, that you are showing up professionally, that you are representing yourself in the best light possible. um, I do definitely, I can understand some of the residual frustration around like if you take the time to really prepare and in your interview and it's not really seeming like it's being taken as seriously as it should. But I can assure you, just because they have that internal office culture and they have that work environment at their team, does not it's not an indicator of how seriously they are taking the interview in a lot of cases. It's just that they are used to their current work environment, and over time they've gained a lot of comfort with that, and thusly maybe they're just coming to work as their authentic selves that day.
Great advice. Great advice. We're going to do one more and then we'll jump back into the presentation. Should my intro include my hobbies as well?
Yep. In a lot of ways, yes. It's really dependent on whether your hobbies are applicable to the role that you're applying to, right? So we gave the example previously of if you're working in IT support and your hobbies happen to be like technical troubleshooting, putting together computers, things like that. That absolutely can be a factor. Or even if you're not applying to something that's necessarily a role for the company, but it is a company that's interested in a certain thing. So, like, let's say you're big into gaming and you're applying for like a company that a customer service role in a company that basically has made games that you like for the past several years. You can state that in your elevator pitch. You can say, hey, I really love this company. I've been playing their games for years. I'm really interested in working with you all just as an extension of what I've been able to experience as a consumer. That kind of personal anecdote can help in a lot of cases. So it's really about knowing your audience and about calibrating it to the situation that's at hand. Alrighty. And then, yeah, hopping back into the presentation itself here. Again, we've mentioned this a couple times now, but practice definitely makes perfect when it comes to interviews. There are a lot of folks, especially first couple interviews that you land, where you come off as very stiff, very rigid, and it's hard to like represent yourself as in your best light in these circumstances. Research, preparation, things like that can go a long way towards making you more confident in your delivery while you are in that interviewing setting. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the more interviews that you get, the more comfortable you'll be in that context. So as far as pre-work, essentially, so to speak, you'll want to, again, make sure that you are researching those common interview questions. We do have interview prep modules on the Career Circle platform, so you can absolutely take the time to check those out. They will have basically pre and post interview etiquette questions, and then additionally we'll kind of give you some insight as to what to expect when you're within an interview. Also has a couple examples of behavioral questions, so you can kind of help to prepare yourself for those a little bit more. Practicing that elevator pitch, again, writing it down helps a lot with like the passive memorization aspect of it, and then timing yourself on how long it takes you to answer. It can be helpful in a lot of cases. Some people, we found that additional pressure of like, I have to get a better time, it cannot be as helpful for them. So calibrate that to your own personal work habits and things along those lines, but can be a helpful tool for sure. And then lastly, make sure that you have a notebook with like shorthand reminders of situations that you've encountered at work to help jog your experience. The amount of times that a candidate will get into an interview setting and then kind of blank out on all the work that they've done up to this point is very frequent, right? It happens all the time, and so don't feel bad in the event that happens to you. It's very common. But that little notebook with reminders of those situations, like on a per position basis, can be very, very helpful to kind of like get you back into the game, right? Just like reading a quick line of like, at XYZ company, I did XYZ thing. That can really help you to make sure that you are staying actively engaged with the process instead of like having a quick freeze moment.
Ethan, if I can have you to stay on that slide for
Mm,
two more ticks, we got two questions actually that aligned with what you were talking about as far as the elevator pitch. The first one being, how long is too long or too short for an elevator pitch?
yes, we do recommend you keep your elevator pitch kind of like within 1 to 3 minutes. Again, if you were thinking from a writing perspective, like 2 to 3 paragraphs is usually about the limit of what you want to get through. Um, Too short will make it so that it's very forgettable. They don't really remember what it was. Too long can be memorable for the wrong reasons, as in a person's like not concise, not succinct. They don't really know how to articulate themselves well. So that 1 to 3 minutes, that's very much your sweet spot. And again, like timing yourself can really help with that.
And the second question was, can you please elaborate on the psychological setback you mentioned when not delivering the memorized elevator pitch to completion and how to recover from that?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a very, very common thing. Nerves are always going to be a factor in the interview setting. So the best way that you can temper those nerves over time is by practicing with either peers or with a career coach or with a mentor over time, and it will just help you to feel much more confident within that interview context. The psychological impact of like getting a question wrong, overcoming that can be very difficult. Oftentimes I'll phrase it this way: there's very few things that you can say on a front end of an interview. With the obvious caveat of like professionalism and all that at the front end of engagement. um, there's very few things that you can say that you can't make up for with a later answer, right? So try to make sure that you are like taking that as active calibration at all times. You might not answer something as completely as you thought you could in the moment, but next two questions you answer things very completely, very well, and kind of find your groove again. So try not to get too mired up in the moment to moment like sentences of your answers, and think more about the interview in a wider scope.
Thank you so much for that. And you all keep those questions coming. We are absolutely going to keep trying to get to all of them if we have time to. But we can go right back into the presentation, Ethan.
Awesome. So post interview etiquette or after your interview, definitely want to make sure that you send a thank you note. You'll want to email that within 24 hours. A lot of folks, I've heard feedback previously that within 1 hour after your interview. It's not necessary that you are like that responsive, but within 24 hours, absolutely, you want to make sure that you get something out to those interviewers. Reflecting on the interview. So yeah, take the time to. We kind of talked about this actually in that previous answer. Think about the interview at scope and like what you think you did well. Like really give yourself your kudos for the things that did go well, because again, really helps to boost your confidence when you are in that interview setting. But do be cognizant and acknowledge the things that you maybe didn't do so well. Like let's say you maybe didn't give as well a good of an answer about your experience as you thought you could have. Drill down on that. Take the time to think about how you might answer your experiences about your work more succinctly, more robustly, things like that. Um, Following up, you want to make sure that you are taking the steps on your end, basically doing your due diligence um, to basically catch up with the employer if they have not gotten back to you. I will say a lot of folks, they do, especially as things are right now with a lot of like digital engagement online. Um, we do get a lot of questions about like, is it bad for me to follow up too many times, things along those lines. It is helpful and we found that it is helpful for interviewers to know there are other people obviously within the interviewing process, and interviewing processes sometimes can be very long, especially for like internal employer positions. It can go anywhere from like 2 to 4 months in some cases. And so being cognizant of that and being understanding of like the timeline and the fact that these are at the end of the day people, and they are actively working, they are trying to fill this position, things like that. It can be helpful. So try not to inundate, right? Like you don't want to send like a message a day, but within like 48 hours or within whatever timeline that they've given you, if you haven't heard back from them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with sending a polite nudge. um, Connecting on LinkedIn, I do believe in a lot of cases it is appropriate to just send a follow-up note and a connection request to your interviewer on LinkedIn. If for no other reason, then it can help to boost your network just generally, and helps you to, again, make a stronger impression with the interviewer in a lot of cases. And we've had good feedback from members who have had interviews of asking those questions specifically in the moment, like, hey, do you mind if I shoot you a quick connection request on LinkedIn after this in case I have any other questions about the role? Like, bringing it up and teeing it up in the interview context can help to make that a little bit smoother on the back end. If there are follow-up interviews or assessments, usually they'll kind of give you the breakdown on that within the moment, in that kind of like timeline when they follow up with you. This is a great question to ask as well in an interview context, like asking about those next steps and what that looks like. Make sure that you are ready for those. So keep an eye out on your email inbox. Take the time to make sure that you are doing all of your assessments or follow-up interviews in a timely manner. And more than anything, make sure that if there are expectations that you have that are not being met by the employer, again, if they haven't reached out to you with the information that they need to for those follow-up steps, make sure that you just, again, send that polite nudge, try to get them on the up and up. Seeking feedback. This is one that where we do get this question a lot. Is it considered polite to ask for feedback to improve? Yes, absolutely so, especially if you have made the connection with the employer via LinkedIn or any other rapport building work that you've done with them, either or on a direct email chain. You can absolutely seek feedback in that moment. So feel free to follow up with them like, hey, thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate you letting me know that you're not moving forward with me. Just so that I know, are there things that I could stand to work on as a professional that I maybe didn't bring to the table here, or maybe I missed in my interview that I could do better next time. And oftentimes, again, they're just people at the end of the day, so they'll be very willing to share that information with you if they have it on hand. Now, if you're talking to like a recruiter or a scheduling coordinator or something like that, they may not have that information in hand. So just be aware of that. Sometimes the person that you're speaking with may not have that direct feedback. And then, really celebrating your efforts. I mean, at the end of the day, it takes a lot of work, and it is an exhausting process to go through interviews. So really take the time to settle back in with yourself after an interview. Really give yourself a pat on the back. It's hard to go through interviews a lot of the time, and it's a very mentally draining experience in a lot of ways. So check in with yourself, make sure that you're taking care of your mental, but also take the time to be cognizant of the things that went well, didn't go well, etc. It's a really helpful exercise to kind of center yourself after an interview. And then here we do have a cheat sheet of kind of questions. This will be in the content section as well. You can absolutely download this to kind of use for preparation work. We have some of this listed on the Career Circle platform as well, and those interview prep modules. So really, really helpful stuff. But kind of quick questions or behavioral questions that can come up in an interview, and then some general feedback guidelines of how to answer those questions, or basically what to expect from an answer from those questions. A couple key ones here that I just want to point out. Why did you leave your previous position? We've gotten a lot of questions about this specifically in the past. It is important to speak positively as you can. We understand that obviously you won't always have a positive experience with every employer, but it's not that question generally is not a space to disparage your prior employer. So make sure that you are, if there is a negative experience, that you are answering as neutrally as possible. Additionally, in this space, you'll want to take the time to ensure that you are driving home your career goals. So if the reason that you left your prior organization is that you weren't being afforded the opportunity for growth, this is a great place to highlight that and make sure that the interviewer knows that that's important to you. Additionally, the questions that you have for us, this is again where you really get the opportunity to take it from an interview or like a checkbox to a conversation. You can make it very engaging and ask essentially a lot of like detailed questions, provided that you've done the research about both the organization, the interviewer, the work itself, if it has not been answered already in the interview, the team that you would be working on, things along those lines. So it's really helpful to make sure that you, one, showcase that you've done a lot of research into the organization, that you have a lot of investment in working with them, and then two, make it a conversation and make it stick out in the interviewer's mind and make you basically just a little bit more of an eligible applicant. with that, I think we are ready to move to the next slide.
Alrighty, we're going to go right into questions and answers. So, first question that I have: what are some tips on how I can use AI to practice interviewing? Can you give an example of a prompt I would enter?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a. I would say AI is a really valuable tool for this in a lot of ways, because what you can do is you can essentially plug in the job description for the role. So you can say, I am an interviewer, and this is where, yeah, I'll give like an example of the prompt. I am an interviewer applying to a job with this title. Below is the job description. Could you give me 3 to 5 interview questions that I could expect in that interview context? And then you can actively seek feedback on your answers to those questions. So provided you have the time to type all those answers out, you can basically answer each question and then ask the AI for feedback, and if there are things that it would recommend that you include in those answers. That's a really great question. Yeah, it's a really useful way to apply AI for sure.
Absolutely. In an interview, if I'm asked to talk about my weaknesses, this is a good one. Will that go against me? What are some examples of answers you look for when interviewing? Oh, this looks like it might be a second part to the question, but it's kind of separate. So
Sure.
we'll just go with that first portion.
Okay, yeah. So as far as weaknesses, oftentimes I will say no. The employers are kind of getting a sense of where you're at in your professional journey with that question, right? So if your weaknesses are things that would be deal breakers, so to speak, for an organization, like let's say in your weaknesses, and I wouldn't recommend really saying this ever, but in your weaknesses, you say, I'm basically never on time for anything. I'm always late. Like that's kind of an example of something that would be like a deal breaker in a lot of cases with an employer. But oftentimes when they're asking for weaknesses, they're kind of asking for like subtle nuance things about the work that you do. So like you can say things along the lines of, especially if it's not an important thing for this role. Sometimes, if I'm receiving multiple directives at once, it's difficult for me to prioritize them, and so I sometimes need clear direction on what is a high priority. That's kind of the way that I would answer questions like that. The questions that kind of guide them towards like this is the way that I prefer to be worked with in a professional setting.
I love that response. The advice that I was given was whatever weakness that you provide, you need to provide a means of how you manage that, and so
Exactly.
that aligns with what you said beautifully. So, what are some examples of answers you look for when interviewing a candidate? Is the second component of this. So I'm assuming that that was an example. They want an example of a weakness. You gave one, but give us another example of a way that we can do that balance thing.
If there are examples of weaknesses that I'd be seeking in candidates, I would be probably asking pointed questions more towards um, what is necessary for the role, right? So, like, let's say a role does require a lot of latitude for independent decision making. I would ask them questions that surround, how have you handled multiple competing projects at the same time? How have you worked with your peers to ensure that a project was delivered on time in the event that you had those competing workloads? Very specific questions that kind of go along in tandem with the workload, as far as like generalized questions, things that you might expect from a weaknesses perspective. I'm trying to think a bit more broad. They may ask questions about your time. Like it kind of depends on what you're applying to, right? So they may ask questions about your timeliness, about your ability to impact deadlines, about your ability to like work with others essentially. Those broader questions, that's where you really heavily want to rely on the star method and kind of give specific examples to speak to how you have handled those situations previously, because it helps the employer really understand, hey, it's not just like this is what I would do in the situation, this is what I have done in that situation.
Absolutely. What are ways that I can find out about the accommodations a company has without disclosing my disability during the interview process?
Oftentimes with the person that is coordinating your interview, those are the kinds of questions that you can ask. Also, sometimes those companies do have that information freely accessible just on their website, so you can absolutely do some research into that independently. If you are asking the interview coordinator, you can absolutely just ask at a high level, like, "Hey, I'm curious about the accommodations that you all offer for folks with disabilities." They may ask a follow-up question, and you can certainly say that you're not comfortable disclosing that at this time, and then they'll likely provide a more general response. That's usually how the thread of conversation goes at that stage.
So, my next question is, what if you have limited professional experience to pull from for the behavioral interview questions? What if you haven't experienced any conflict in the workplace or a difficult deadline to meet?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oftentimes, you'll proceed this with, I have not encountered this situation in a professional capacity. However, I did have the situation come up in a personal capacity, and personal experience for behavioral questions specifically is just as valid as professional experience. There's a lot of again, they're really seeking to understand how you'll react in a certain context with these questions, as opposed to like, this is directly how this applies to this role, because it's not like a technical based question in a lot of cases. So that being said, yeah, oftentimes you can lean on your personal projects, any engagements that you've had with peers, family members, things like that. Just leading with the and providing them with the context, like, hey, this isn't in my professional work experience.
So, just looking at the time, y'all, it's been 50 minutes already. We only have time for maybe 2 to 3 more questions. All right. And so, with that being said, Ethan, I know you got me.
Yeah.
Question number one. Once I was asked a question like this, did you deal with the difficult manager and how did you deal with the difficult manager? I felt like a tornado went through my head. And what should I answer in this situation? What does the recruiter expect asking this type of question?
That's a great. That's a. It's a two things. One, it's a great way to think about the question. So, what is the recruiter seeking as an answer? That's a great way to like lead with the thought, because again, being cognizant of the fact that you are interviewing and you are trying to like basically get a job, it's better for you to have the context on what they're seeking to understand from the question. Two, it's not a unique experience that you had a difficult time answering that. It's a question that comes as a curveball to a lot of folks. Oftentimes, what the recruiter is seeking in that instance is, in the event that you have a disagreement with your manager, is it something that you are able to mediate on your own and offer that direct feedback and engagement with your manager, or is it something that you may have to engage with a third party on in a lot of cases, namely either a peer manager of theirs or escalating to your boss's boss, so to speak. And there's no wrong answer to this in a lot of cases. I will say, it's genuinely, and a lot of time, they are trying to understand how you will fit into a professional capacity within a given organization. And so take the time to assess for yourself, if you have had that experience, like, what was my recourse, what was my action? And it's even normal to say, sometimes I just didn't really take a lot of action. I heard what the manager needed from me. I sat with my feelings for that, and I didn't offer that direct feedback to them. In hindsight, I would have offered that, right? So that's always the operative piece. Make sure that you offer the resolution that you would have done with the full benefit of hindsight. I think that's very helpful in a lot of ways, because again, it just tells the other person kind of how you think and how you operate as a person.
So the next question, sometimes we don't get a proper email directly from the employer for an interview. It's mostly a calendar invitation. In such a case, how do we send a thank you or follow-up email?
That's a really good question. Usually within the interview context, it's good to seek either kind of ask permission for, or just seek the contact, not contact information, but the email addresses or LinkedIn of the people that you're interviewing with. That way you can send that follow up, and it kind of like, again, primes them to receive it. So at the end of an interview, you can say something along the lines of like, hey, I'd love to connect just to, again, kind of keep tabs on the organization and get a greater understanding. Would you mind if I connected with you on LinkedIn, or would you mind if I just shot you a quick email after the call here, or after the call, or after the interview, just to follow up and make sure that I'm doing my due diligence on my side. And again, at the end of the day, these are just people, right? So some people, they may, it depends on the person, obviously, but they may not be open to that, but they will likely give you a point of contact that you can continue to follow up with over time. Or they may be completely open to that and say like, yeah, I would love to network. And, if you have any questions, feel free to, shoot them over to me. Happy to help there. So again, it's teeing them up, priming them for the response, and kind of soliciting that additional contact information in the event that you don't have it.
Ethan, you are such a trooper. Like literally, you've been popping these questions out so fast. I thought we only had time for two, but we got time for two more. Okay. So, in the event
Absolutely.
of a denial for a job, and it goes something like, at this point, we've decided to go ahead with a different candidate. Should
Mhm.
I seek feedback?
It depends on who you received that from. So if it's an automated system, a lot of the time, you may not have immediate recourse or an ability to seek feedback. If you have collected the interviewer's LinkedIn and you are networked with them, you can absolutely follow up with them, but it's all in the way that you ask, right? So you want to try to not think of it as like a transactional thing and more of a networking thing at that point. So you're trying to get a greater understanding of, hey, I understand, I'm maybe not a great fit for the position at this time. Are there things that you would recommend that I would continue to develop? And it's treated as a networking conversation more than a hey, what did I do wrong for this job? That's never going to land too well. So transactional engagements like that, where you're actively seeking feedback and you're just kind of like trying to treat it as a one-to-one, not very helpful. But if you treat it as a sweeping like networking thing and like, hey, I'm just trying to continue to grow in this space, that usually lands a little bit more favorably with the other person.
Okay, last question. Please elaborate on how to leverage and stand out when interviewing for an internship where both parties know that the applicant is limited in their skill set, but realize the internship will be an entry point to gain those skills and hands on experience for future career goals.
Great question. Leveraging soft skills as best as you can is the best way to stand out in those contexts because, to your point, they are entry point roles in a lot of ways. So the applicant pool is usually very dense. So making sure that you're taking the extra steps to do your research in the organization, ask a lot of questions, and trying to make the interview conversational to stand out in the interviewer's mind. Those are kind of your best ways of really standing out from that process. And when I say the soft skills, it's kind of like the additional pieces of pre-interview etiquette and post-interview etiquette, right? Like, what are you doing to research? What are you doing to follow up? And then, like, when you're in the interview, what are you doing to make it a more engaging experience for the other party? Because again, as people, that just kind of we remember the things that stand out in our minds, and if you are personal, enthused, things like that, those will usually be a bit more. They'll stand out a lot more to a recruiter.
Well, I cannot thank you enough, Ethan, for your time and your valuable nuggets of wisdom. And I want to thank every single person that is on this call. Please stay until the end. I have some important information that I'd like to give to you, okay? We'll be sending you a post event email, which will include the recording as well as the resources that we spoke about on today. It will also have a survey. That survey is so important to us, right? We absolutely want to hear from you. We encourage you to take it. You already had that QR code. You'll also get the QR code in a follow up email. Make sure that you're giving us your feedback. We absolutely want to see how we can improve. Once you complete the survey, there's a prize attached to this. You'll be contacted with a link to create a career coach meeting with one of our esteemed Career Circle advisors. Okay. Our amazing coaches assist with everything from resume prep to interviewing prep. So you'll get an opportunity to get this kind of information one on one. They're excited to speak to you. So please make sure that you are completing that survey. So, yes, we want the feedback, but also you get something out of it. All right. So make sure to like and follow us on our socials to stay up to date on all the platform updates. And then lastly, once again, we want to again say thank you so much for joining us. Okay. I hope that you all leave here today feeling empowered, inspired, and ready to enter your next job interview with confidence. We've had an amazing time on today. Please join us for our upcoming webinars. The next one is going to be April the 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can view all of our events and register on careercircle.com/events. Thank you so much and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.